Can you talk to me about its placement in as a sort of antagonistic message against against High Noon?
Sure. Yeah, and that is maybe what Rio Bravo is best known for. And it's often the case that movies over time get reduced to a kind of symbolic status in some larger cultural story that's taking place. So that has certainly happened to Rio Bravo. So the argument here is that when Howard Hawks saw the 1952 Western High Noon, starring Gary Cooper, directed by Fred Zinnemann, he was greatly offended. Now, what it was that offended him potentially changed over time. But there is the idea that he was offended by something, and so he made Rio Bravo in 1959 as a kind of response. Now, High Noon is famous for its purported allegory of politics in Hollywood at the time. The screenwriter Carl Foreman was blacklisted. And so the idea of that film story, which is about a sheriff who's kind of abandoned by all of his friends, is seen by many as an allegory for the blacklist, where you had these writers or other professionals in the film industry who were revealed in public to have communist ties, members of the Communist Party in some cases, communist sympathies, and were abandoned and put on trial and all of these things, right? So Rio Bravo is supposedly a kind of response to that. Now, history is a little bit more complicated. The degree to which High Noon was either intended as or was actually received at the time as this blacklist allegory is an open question. I've got a friend named Austin Fisher who wrote an amazing essay about a year and a half ago where he looked at how High Noon was reviewed, and basically no reviewer out of hundreds of reviews talked about the film having to do with anything to do with the blacklist. So there's this kind of disparity between the stories that Hollywood tells about itself and that historians pick up on, and that what was actually happening at the time. And that is an important lesson for us to keep in mind. So there's that part of it. But then there's also Hawks' own words. And when I read interviews with Hawks, what he talks about is how he was offended at the idea that this kind of cowardly sheriff would go around asking all these weak people for help, and then he would need his wife to save him in the end. So instead, Rio Bravo has a team of professionals, right? I mean, they live in a town, but the town is almost a non-entity, right? There's no mass gathering of people. There's sort of people in the background. But there's a very small cast, and most of them are professionals who essentially say, I don't need anybody's help. I can handle this. We'll handle this together. And that's what they do. And to me, that is the way that it is more of a response. And that's the way that the Western works. High Noon itself is a kind of what if story about what happens if the hero stays in town. What would happen if Wyatt Earp didn't ride out of town at the end of My Darling Clementine? So High Noon says, well, that wouldn't be good because society is weak and corrupt and they would turn on the sheriff. I mean, it's a very Western place to go. And so then if High Noon is a kind of response to that, then Rio Bravo is a response to High Noon, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the more productive way to look at it. Sort of this idea of what is the sheriff's relationship to society? Is he apart from society? Does he have a responsibility to protect it? And what does it mean if the kind of the drama that the sheriff finds himself in actually has no bearing whatsoever on the townspeople?
I'm glad you recast it in that light, because specifically High Noon, because I like looking at it as objectively as I can. I saw it more as like an emphasis on an individual who, it's not a collectivist minded film by any means. It was hard for me to look at it and see how this would be seen, considered as sort of through the lens of a left-leaning politics or a clear-cut politics at all.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, one way that people saw it at the time was as a kind of, some people were inclined to see it as an endorsement of the Korean War. Huh. And, that like National Review included High Noon on its list of best conservative movies. I mean, like John Wayne accepts Gary Cooper's Best Picture Oscar. And when he's on stage, he's like saying he's going to go back and fire his agents and writers because they didn't, get him the script before they got it to Coop. So,
The High Noon script?
Absolutely, yeah.
Whoa, okay.
Now, so the story that Wayne told about the film, of course, changed over time. That by the time you get to the 70s, Wayne is talking about it, more like Hawks, but also in a more political way. But, in the moment, he didn't see it that way. And that's okay. I mean, our ideas change, arguments are made, those shape our perception of the past. I mean, it's inevitable. But I agree with you that when I watch High Noon, I mean, I think it has, it's a good film. I don't know if it's a great film.
Yeah.
But it just seems kind of a quintessential Western, the lone hero apart from society, doing what is right, revealing the corruption of the society he's helped to bring into being. I mean, it's very Western in that respect. And I know, and I don't know if there's a straightforward politics in that. I think it's a film that people from all political persuasions could look at and think, yes, this movie tells me that what I believe is right. But that's the trick of most great American cinema, is people of widely divergent political perspectives can look at it and think, yes, this movie is for me.
I love that. That is what I want out of a film.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So the comparisons to it's more than political, because there's the cultural aspect that you kind of hinted at right there with regard to, I don't think it's a great film. Yet if you look at Rio Bravo and High Noon, which one won some awards and which one got more critical attention? But if I'm sitting down, I'm going to put on Rio Bravo over High Noon because it feels good. And part of the most, well, we can talk about that in a second. Yeah. But what do you think of that? Just the difference in how they're received.
I mean, yeah. I mean, personally, if the choice is between a movie with Angie Dickinson and a movie without her, I'm always going to pick the movie with Angie Dickinson.
Nice.
No, I think you're onto something there. That the Western, when it was really popular, accommodated different types of movies. So, High Noon is a very serious film, right? It has almost no humor whatsoever, and we get the sense that it is a film that is trying to reflect seriously on some of the myths that we've told ourselves about how it is America came to be, right? So you could argue that it's even a pretentious film, maybe in that respect. In some of the speeches that take place, there's a speech that the former sheriff gives. There's a speech that the preacher gives. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the movie. Will Kane, Gary Cooper's character. So, we expect a film like that to be received in a certain way, to kind of win awards. Now, Rio Bravo is a more lighthearted film. It has moments of humor, and the stakes aren't as high. It is not suggesting that the history of civilization, American civilization, hinges upon this particular archetypal moment or anything like that. At least it doesn't seem to be. And it was a very popular film. There's, if you look at box office, there's a bit of a decline in the popularity of the Western in the late 50s in the movies. And, Rio Bravo, and Hawks has said this correctly, kind of is a huge hit that helps to bring the Western back and maybe ushers in a different type of Western, more of a kind of ensemble, more of a lighthearted Western. We certainly see a lot of those in the 60s. With all that said, though, there is, you could still make academic arguments about the film. So a famous one, and this goes back to a sociologist named Will Wright, who wrote a very provocative, I would say, book called Six Guns in Society in the 1970s, who argues that the Western kind of evolves in distinct blocks. And he sees the Western from Rio Bravo onward as what he calls the professional Western. So that this Western is, as I said earlier, about sort of men apart from society, who get satisfaction from their professional camaraderie, from their status as professionals, from their aptitude and ability. They're not looking for external validation. They don't need the townspeople to cheer them on. They're just doing it for themselves. And we certainly see a lot of Westerns like that into the 60s and 70s. There's no question. Wright's argument would be that that mirrors changes in American society, that over the course of the 50s, we began to have the rise of a kind of technocratic professional class that we were increasingly interested or willing to give over our autonomy to. We're increasingly reliant on technology. We don't know how that technology works, but there are these, great men who are going to take care of it, or kind of engineer society. And if you think about what the 50s were like and that progression, if you think about some of the attempts at social engineering that start to happen in the 1960s, most of which backfire, there is something to that argument. So I don't want to say there isn't the serious argument, but was Hawks intending any of that? No, I think he was just wanting to stick it to Fred Zinnemann and just give folks a good time and a song or two.
I love that. I mean, it's inevitable that any of that social upheaval or change is going to just, even if it's only in a blink, it's going to appear.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, any piece of art is the product of the forces in play at the time it was made. But what I always caution people is to not think that that is a one-to-one relationship, that society was this way and ergo art was this way. Artists have a wide latitude in terms of how they engage with, consciously and unconsciously, with the times in which they were made. So that's, when you have a vibrant art form like the Western, you're going to get different takes on society that may express, contemporary concerns in different ways or at all. And then again, we go back to the agency of the individual viewer, who may or may not get any of that. And that, to them, it may not matter. And that's fine, because they have that relationship with art. That's one of the wonderful things about art. We have a personal relationship with it.
I like that. And actually, probably the strongest point of my personal relationship with Rio Bravo comes from this scene that on my first watch just blew my mind. Because you see John Wayne, they're in the jail cell, they're kind of bored, and he looks over, and Dean Martin starts singing "My Rifle, My Pony, and Me." Yeah. And I remember just getting chills and tearing up and having this very serious emotional response, because partially because I didn't expect it at all. And then you got Ricky Nelson playing the guitar.
Yes. My Uncle Ricky. I make that joke, and students don't always get it anymore. But, no, I mean, it's completely unexpected. It's I think indicative of what Rio Bravo is. It's a more casual film. Like you have the sense that they were having a good time making this movie. Yeah. That there might have been a kind of camaraderie amongst the players that mirrors the camaraderie that exists amongst their characters, or something like that. But it's also, I guess it's also a testament to how much power Hawks had at this particular moment, where he could basically say, and at this point, we're going to basically stop the story for 2 songs, because we've got Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson here.
I love that he made that. I love that he had the power to make that decision. Because I think it's, there's the Tarantino line about how this is his hang film, or like his hangout. This is what he puts on when he's just hanging out. It really has that vibe through the whole. I mean, even when it's starting to get intense, and like, Dean Martin's character and the Duke's character are like kind of hunting through the town, it has that feel to it. It's a relaxing movie.
I agree with that. I mean, it's just an entertaining movie, but I would also agree with what you said before, that it's just filled with kind of moments of where we're just not expecting what we get. So many of the characters, in different ways defy what we would expect. Feathers, the Angie Dickinson character, gets the best of John Wayne's John T. Chance repeatedly. She always has the upper hand, right? She's got him on his back.
From their first meeting.
Yeah, right. It's just amazing to watch, and we know that Wayne was not the suavest of performers in romantic scenes, but this is a filmmaker recognizing, well, I can take advantage of that. And what's funny is that it's those personal relationships. Feathers and Chance Chance and Dude, especially, with
Yeah.
Dude's arc of redemption. Those are the real drama. It's sort of like all of the action and the sort of revenge narrative is. I mean, the stakes just never feel that high, right?
Yeah. But it's fascinating because with that redemption, with Dude's redemption arc, those stakes are pretty high. We find out, so there is like in the sort of personal sense, there's a lot. Like it seems like comparing it to High Noon again, which maybe isn't in this respect the right thing to do, but there's so much more warmth there. Yeah. And there is the hue, like John Wayne's character holding up the frilly Western lingerie. It's such a funny movie.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and again, it could be that because we are so interested in and genuinely care about the characters, that the narrative doesn't need to engineer scenarios that are, at least on paper, as high stakes, right? Where like there's like Chance doesn't need to be outnumbered by whatever 20-1 or whatever it needs to be, like it can be the odds can kind of be even in some respects, but we're still going to be engrossed and care about it because we're interested in him as a character.
So we also have Walter Brennan with a great performance.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, Walter Brennan is, he's got one of those voices that is instantly recognizable. It actually, is kind of the voice that, you hear in a cartoon now, anytime there's an old coot character.
Yeah.
And, there's an argument to be made that Rio Bravo kind of cemented Brennan's association with that persona, the kind of, like the toothless old timer kind of thing, which is a testament to the performance, but is also kind of unfortunate because, Brennan had a really remarkable career. He won 3 Academy Awards, and even within the Western, played a great variety of characters, and some very scary and villainous characters. He's Old Man Clanton in My Darling Clementine. Mm-hmm. He's Judge Roy Bean in The Westerner, which won him an Academy Award. So I think it's always interesting, like for me when I show my students, because we'll probably watch Rio Bravo earlier in the class, and they'll sort of see him and recognize where that character comes from. But then you see him as these really disturbing and often villainous characters early in his career. Same voice, obviously different inflection, but in those moments we recognize that this guy was a great actor. He understood what he had, but he could use it in different ways. Of course, by 59, he's getting older, and by that point there are a lot of old coots in Western movies, so that kind of becomes his go-to from this point on.
So we've talked about Howard Hawks a little bit, and I'm very interested in one of my favorite arguments that you make is that there's sort of the idea of a classical Western is sort of mythology, or it's imposed on a genre. What role does Rio Bravo play in that argument?
Yeah. So, I mean, the interesting thing about talking about a golden age is sometimes the golden age expands over time, right? And even as it expands, the number of films that represent the golden age gets smaller and smaller. So with the Western, there were some critics writing in the 50s who said that the golden age of the Western was like 1939 to 1945, and that everything after that was superficial, pastiche, self-conscious, something like that. We get to the 1970s, and suddenly everything from 1939 up to at least the mid, if not the late 1960s, is the classic Western. So, at one time we would have seen a film like Rio Bravo, and others like Shane or High Noon as being something other than this classic Western. And one argument would be that for Rio Bravo, that idea of the professionals, that the Western is different now, right? This is a very different type of film. It's about professionals apart from society. Their motivations are very different, and so on. So you could make the case for a different kind of break. But I mean, in the standard narrative, though, Rio Bravo is one of the great classic westerns, and Hawks is one of the pantheon filmmakers. You know, that this is a classic film. It's got classic actors in it, and it supposedly tells us, I don't know, something about this great golden age the Western enjoyed from 1939 to 1969. 30 years, never changing, which of course makes no sense. But, as a historian, you look back and you try to make sense of different things. You look at phenomena, you try to classify it. And one argument that I've made is that people like the idea of the classic Western because then they can say that everything that comes after it is something different. So, from the Wild Bunch onward, all bets are off. But, to me, the Wild Bunch is a lot more like Rio Bravo than Rio Bravo is like Stagecoach.
Wow.
So, I try to, take films as they are, look for trends as opposed to, human history evolving in clear, distinct blocks. Just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I encountered this with, I'm going through the Renown cycle. So,
Great.
Boetticher, yeah. Oh, such a joy to go through. But I was reading a review by Criterion Collection, and they described it as a link between the classical Western and the postmodern Peckinpah Western. And something about that I didn't like, though. I know that's close to the argument you just made, but the way they said it bothered me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you could see that argument. I mean, I haven't read that particular essay, but I can see that argument. A lot of it is the idea that these films, they star Randolph Scott, but they're subversive in some ways, and then Randolph Scott then transitions from these films to making Ride the High Country, which is sort of Peckinpah's early big screen Western, and so that becomes a kind of chain that leads us to a film like The Wild Bunch. So I can see making that argument, but I also think, to me, the degree to which Peckinpah is a distinct break from the Westerns of Ford is usually overstated. I mean, he's interested in the Western. His films are all about the Western. They are different because they are more violent, but then, all movies in 1969 are more violent. Some are more violent than others. But there are other changes that are stylistic changes that sometimes, because they're so impactful, right? Exploding bodies and slow motion and so on, that we sometimes fixate on those, the style, instead of the substance. So I could see the argument. I also think you could make other ones.
Yeah, I like that framing because there's a part of me that just wants Boetticher to and especially the Renown cycle, to just stay on its own. Yeah. It's kind of like it rides lonesome. It's out there on its own. Just don't try to link it to anything.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, this idea of it kind of being a Renown cycle is something of a fabrication of history, right? Us putting them all together.
Funny. Yeah.
Right? But it certainly, all but one of the films were, aside from Seven Men from Now, which was made by John Wayne's production company, they all obviously have Bud Boetticher and the director's chair, Randolph Scott, different writers. I think the Burt Kennedy written pictures tend to be better. I mean, that's I guess a fairly cliched thing to say at this point, but I think it's true. But no, I'm fine with that existing as like a box set, and they're 70 minutes each. And you just eat them like potato chips. It's like, oh, yes, I'll have another one. I mean, they're just beautiful films.
Yeah, it's just incredible, and also and it's so impressive that he was able to do that with all the budgetary, the size of the cast, all of it. He created these masterpieces.
Yeah. Well, it tells us something about where the Western was in the mid to late 50s. I mean, it was just highly refined in terms of how do we make these movies, where do we make these movies, who is in these movies, and then into that context you can get individual artists who are able to take it up to another level, right? To work within the strictures of the form, but to do something a little bit different, to elevate it slightly in ways that we appreciate in hindsight.
So, going back to Rio Bravo,
Yeah.
wh- I kind of have a controversial opinion in that I think I enjoy El Dorado more. El Dorado's the one I keep on repeat, and I love Rio Bravo, so it's not like this one's awful and this one's great, but
Yeah.
I prefer it. Why did Hawks make 3 movies out of that Harry Brown book?
Yeah. Well, that is a controversial opinion. The only other person I can think of who makes that case that El Dorado is the better film is Paul Simpson in a book called The Rough Guide to Westerns.
My man.
He has a little point where he thinks that El Dorado is the superior film. Right. So why would Hawks do this over and over again? So in terms of the Brown novel, that's more the inspiration, supposedly loose inspiration for El Dorado. Rio Bravo is very loosely based on a story by B.H. McCampbell, I think, called Rio Bravo.
Gotcha.
But it, nevertheless, is dealing with similar subject matter, and it seems like Hawks is, remaking the same film not once but twice. Rio Lobo being the last one, where you kind of have this Civil War prologue, and then we get into a very familiar narrative where it's Wayne and the Hawksian woman, and a kind of a younger second gun hand, and then an old coot character. Yeah, so why would he do this? What does it mean? Does it suggest that he was running out of ideas? Well, the fact that you enjoy El Dorado more means the answer is no, right? That he was able to do something with that scenario to kind of to innovate in a way that we find, I don't know, it's still very kind of I guess the small differences become much more meaningful. A question for you would be why, if I asked you what it is about El Dorado that you think I would pick that instead, what is it?
I think it's Robert Mitchum.
Really? Okay.
I know that's a tough one because Dean Martin is just brilliant. His performance is breathtaking, but something about Mitchum is just, I love him as an actor, and this performance of him as the slouching, drunken sheriff who can't pull it together, and his redemption story, and then that warmth that he and the Duke share on screen just feels so genuine.
Yeah. Well, again, I think so. A lot of those variations are meaningful. This is, unlike Dude with Mitchum's character. I'm forgetting his character's name right now.
Yeah, I can't think of it either.
Yeah. Apologies to the completists out there. But the difference is that we see him before the fall, and then we see him fallen, and then we see him recover, which is different than Dude, where we sort of see him. Our introduction to him is at his lowest. Ooh. And maybe that says something about Mitchum as a performer, that he could pull that off, or we could see him one way in one scene, and then time was passed, and suddenly we see him in a very different state, and it's believable. Maybe Martin wasn't as capable as that. I don't know. And then the ending of the film where you have Mitchum and Wayne together walking down the street, without the woman. Charlene Holtz, she's not there, and they're on crutches. It is a very funny scene, and it's an interesting change from what we get at the end of Rio Bravo, where we have Dude and Walter Brennan's character, walking, and they see the garters that fall and so on.
I think that's it right there. That's a big part of it. I prefer the Casablanca ending. Like the friendship and sort of that, they're ribbing each other till the very end.
Yeah. Well, I think that is another indication of one of the sort of general shifts we see in the Western, where there's less focus on the love interest and increasing focus on the camaraderie between the two male leads. Often, one change that I've argued that happens is, in this period, we often see the hero kind of have his darker half reflected in his ally as opposed to in a villain. Like the villains tend to be kind of generic or inconsequential in some ways, or stereotypical, whereas the interplay between the two males becomes increasingly important, and then a larger sort of cast that surrounds them. And we see that in The Professionals, The Magnificent Seven, certainly in The Wild Bunch, and so on. I like that, the Casablanca ending, though. Yeah, that is what it is. I mean, so it raises lots of questions, though. Like, what does this mean for all the ladies in the audience watching? If the end is just these dudes out together in the wilderness as opposed to ending up with a woman, I don't know. I mean,
That's true.
I mean, we're talking about Charlene Holt here too. So Wayne has made a grave error.
Yeah, it's also, I like that. I like John Wayne's character in El Dorado more. I think he goes through more literal anguish.
Yes,
and you see his transformation too, and he helps the sheriff. I forget the sheriff's name or Mitchum's character's name too, but he's just such a complicated character. They're both so complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I need to throw is it James Caan into the mix?
Oh man, with the speaking of like portrayals that haven't aged well, he does that really like crass impression of a Chinese immigrant. It's funny though, but like we've talked about before, that was very much something that could be gotten away with at that time.
Yeah, no, I mean this is the thing about older art, is that standards and values were different. That doesn't mean that people didn't object to them at the time.
Yeah,
they did, but it also doesn't mean that we should erase those things from history. I mean, we have to see them in the context to really appreciate them, and I think we need to understand that type of moment of sort of ethnic stereotypical comedy could exist alongside all the other amazing things that you're talking about. I mean, Hollywood movies are always a kind of grab bag, and 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we'll sit down and we'll talk about movies from today, and there will be many things in them that young people will be telling us were terrible, and we will think, wow, it never occurred to me at the time. That's just, change happens.
Yeah, that's funny too, because it doesn't always happen in the direction that anybody had expected. I think that happens pretty often, actually.
Yeah, well, yes, it isn't. It is not linear. I mean, I make this point to my students frequently, that it's not as though, let's say broadly, representation is getting better necessarily.
Yeah.
It's not as though art always just gets better, right? It's not like it's not a teleology. It's not a straightforward Darwinian evolution or anything like that. Art is complicated, and films can get better or worse. The Western can get better or worse on balance, and very different Westerns can exist at the same time. That's part of the fascination, the beauty of it.
This at the time that we're talking, the Western I have coming out tomorrow is Old Henry.
Oh, nice! I like that picture a lot.
But talk about like a great representation of how the violence has changed in Westerns.
Yeah.
Those modern Westerns, man. So, I watched so many from the 40s and 50s, and if I put on a modern one, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming.
Well, I think the thing to remember, a few things to remember. One, most modern Westerns make the violence of the Old West much more exciting and glamorous than it actually was. So this idea that we're getting closer to history is that's another thing. We're not always getting closer to history or veracity or however we want to characterize it. But with the violence, I go back to something I said about The Wild Bunch, that you can watch Westerns from the 50s or 40s and you can see a hero gun down a dozen guys. But there's just a difference between dying off screen or clutching at a kind of bloodless wound and people's jaws being shot off or being gut shot and us like seeing their intestines as they bleed out. I mean, these are just these are stylistic changes. So what's happening hasn't actually changed. It's just the way that we depict it, the way that filmmakers are able to depict it now has changed. But watching them side by side, it's hard not to think of the style and how violent things seem.
Yeah, and I also have repeated. By the way, I've been meant to say this. Thank you for inspiring me to do the Wednesday Western series. That was 100% because I talked to you because I was doing a listicle, and it was supposed to be just a simple listicle, and we started talking, and you opened the floodgates. And because you did that, I have this wonderful, life-changing, beautiful series. So thank you for that.
Well, somebody once called me an evangelist for the Western movie. So
I love that.
So this would be an instance where that seems to. I don't know. I'm just happy anytime people get interested in Westerns and want to write about them because there's so much to say.
The gospel is spreading. Your gospel is being. Which I know you're about to be very, very busy with the Kevin Costner film coming out,
right?
But I would love once your email slow down a bit. I'd love to talk to you about that film as well.
Oh yeah, I'd love to talk about that. That'd be great. No, I'm a little how do I put this? Hopeful but concerned.
Are you a little nervous?
Well, the initial reviews coming out of Cannes were not great and kind of confirmed some things that I was worried about, that that this was a project that was originally conceived as a multi-part streaming series, and that maybe it had not been sufficiently transformed from that format to the cinematic format. I will reserve judgment until I see it, but if it were to flop, it would be very unfortunate.
That's everything that I've read in the interviews you've done. That's the thing that's really caught my attention the most. If this film succeeds, if this because it's 3 films or 2 films,
it's 2 to start, but he wants to make 4.
Okay, and your idea that if this fails, it'll be real bad for the Western.
Yeah.
But if it succeeds, it could be tremendous.
Yeah, no, I kind of said that just as like an offhand remark in a podcast episode where we talked about the trailer, and that kind of really struck my co-host Matt, and then that was the focus of almost all of the response, and then I ended up being contacted by a number of journalists who wanted to talk about that exactly, because it is true that it's happened before that. Big Westerns have been made and failed, and that gives everybody cold feet about making Westerns. It's not like a pattern that repeats exactly, but it has happened. I mean, the degree to which Heaven's Gate killed off the Western 1980s overstated, but after that movie, people aren't going to make it. Dances with Costner, it's interesting because Dances with Wolves kind of kickstarted the last real renaissance of cinematic Westerns in terms of making it to mainstream cinemas. But then Wyatt Earp, which he produced, starred in, didn't direct, was a big flop and kind of killed it off again. So there's the possibility, if this film does well, that it gets people to think about making big screen Westerns in a way that they haven't. The track record isn't very good for just Westerns as Westerns. I've said this many times that the Coen brothers can make a Western, Tarantino can make a Western, because people want to see a Coen brothers or Quentin Tarantino film. It doesn't matter what film Tarantino makes, people will turn out. But people aren't interested. Enough people aren't interested in Westerns in that way. Like you can have a Western that stars Denzel Washington and which one of the Chris's? Chris Pratt. So you can have like 2 huge stars and people aren't interested in it. So the question is, are people that interested in Kevin Costner as a person that it would get them to go and see the type of film they wouldn't ordinarily see in cinemas? So if it does well, it potentially ushers in a new era of big budget Western movie making. But if it doesn't do well, I think it'll be more like the past 30 years where Westerns will be few and far between. The real unfortunate thing, which I've been thinking about more lately, is, and this, that there have been a lot of smaller, very interesting Westerns made over the past 20 years. You mentioned Old Henry. You wrote a great piece about Dead for a Dollar. So, there actually have been these really good Westerns that are made, small scale, often passion projects for actors or directors. that are mostly going to streaming, maybe have limited theatrical runs. And I really find these types of films interesting. Like we're in an age where, Nicolas Cage made 2 Westerns that came out last year, like the Old Way and Butcher's Crossing. And I think that's great. My concern is that would also go away if this is a huge flop. And I think, that would be really unfortunate. But will it kill the Western? No, the Western cannot be killed. The Western will live forever.
My man. It will. It has to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also like that is a more optimistic take than I was reading in those interviews, because I hadn't heard that second part, which is like, well, even if it flops, we'll still have space for the next Buttiker. The person who's able to make a passion project with nothing, and there's so much passion and so much vision that they are able to create something that's just mind-blowing despite all those hindrances.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that there are still spaces for ambitious filmmakers to make Westerns. I mean, I would suspect that would still be the case. Again, if that were to go away, I think that would be the most unfortunate thing. I mean, whether or not we get Westerns in the local multiplex, I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter that much to me.
Yeah.
But if we're not getting the Old Henrys or the Old Ways or the Butcher's Crossings or the Dead for a Dollar, if we're not getting Ballad of Lefty Browns and films like that, I think that would be unfortunate, because to me those are some of the most interesting, best Westerns that have been made in recent years.
Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah, another great example, right? I mean, so there, you've got a novelist who has this idea that he wants to write and direct a Western, and you get a powerful star on board who's all game for it. And I mean, I would hope that would continue to be possible, but that is kind of what's at risk, really. I think that's the what's really at risk at this moment.
Andrew, is anything else you want to say about Rio Bravo, El Dorado?
Just folks should watch both and decide for themselves. They can send you and I emails, which one.
Oh,
then,
yeah.
So if anyone else
you're Rio Bravo. You vote Rio Bravo. I'm kind of the outcast here, huh?
It's fine. Yeah. So all we need is somebody to make the case for Rio Lobo, and we'll be set.
Oh, man. Yeah, you don't hear that one very often. Hey, thank you so much. You really are helping me. You're guiding me along this really cool path. So I really appreciate you.
It's my pleasure, and I give you a ton of credit for not only writing about Westerns, but writing about them in such a thoughtful way.
Let's keep spreading the gospel, brother.
Okay, I like it.